The U.S.'s much vaunted Abrams tank is basically sitting idle in Ukraine, while even the Ukrainians and, frankly, the United States has to admit the Abrams is probably outdated. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about why the main battle tank of the free world isn't doing much work keeping the world free. Let's get into it. Okay. The Abrams tank, according to at least one U.S. advisor, is he's being very generous here, saying is not the most useful for Ukraine's front lines. That's a real nice way of putting it. This is U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated the Abrams tanks supplied to the Ukrainian army have reportedly not been particularly useful in the battlefield in Ukraine. His exact quote, says, when it comes to Abrams tanks, we have sent Abrams tanks to Ukraine. I added that part. Continuing his quote, those Abrams tank units are actually undermined, I think they mean undermanned, because it's not the most useful piece of equipment for them in this fight. This assessment aligns entirely with the conclusions of the U.S. military. Right? Also, only a limited number of pilots are training on F-16s. According to Sullivan, this is not due to U.S. reluctance because the Ukrainians do not have the pilots to be able to build the F-16's capabilities in time. And this is pretty annoying, right? Well, though it should be pretty obvious why this is the case. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why the Abrams particularly is not that effective for this fight. The Abrams, one, was meant to be used as part of air-land battle, the doctrine in the 80s and 90s. And that meant that it was meant to be used in conjunction with decisive air power, right? And it was literally designed in the era when anti-tank teams were much more limited in their capacity. And there was a belief that the U.S. heavy investment in air power would empower the tank to be safe on the battlefield and maneuver, right? And I love the fact that they're like, it's one of the best tanks ever built, but it's still ineffective in Ukraine. And this is classic bureaucratic thinking, where instead of asking ourselves, what's the best way it'd be like saying, what's the best way to get to work? You simply buy a faster and faster car. And this is sort of how bureaucracies can often think about things. Instead of saying, hey, what is the best mix of equipment in our future fight? What does the future fight look like? And what does the future winning military look like? Instead, we say, let's take our current military and make everything a little bit better. Again, this would be something, if this is the equivalent of a Navy at the turn of the last century saying, listen, I don't need a steam-powered engine on my ship. What I need is a ship with bigger sails, right? And this is sort of the problem with the best tank in the world, the Abrams, is that there's not really a way to make this work. Now, of course, some people say, oh, the Ukrainians don't have experience with Abrams tanks, and that's why they've taken such losses. They say, well, the tank's built for a different kind of warfare. And in the era of the drone-heavy, missile-saturated environment, a tank itself is just not that useful. And I think there's some truth to it, right? An Abrams tank is literally a lot of stuff in one place, and it's extremely heavy. It has one big gun, which is sort of inherent to the tank. But the attrition rates for the Abrams particularly have been far higher than anticipated. The Ukrainians, right? Again, this is like they say, oh, it's because the Ukrainians have not used the tanks as they were originally intended to be used, and it's a direct result of the Ukraine's lack of adequate experience with the platforms. This is just wrong. This is just absolutely wrong. The Ukrainian strategy, one, does not favor tank warfare. They are on a defensive fight looking to get the Russians to encroach. There's also problems with holding the battle line. A tank isn't that useful for helping that, right? Some people think that the tank sort of skirting into position and leaving can assist, provide a limited level of fire support. That is not that true, or it's true, but there's intrinsic problems with armor that have emerged in this conflict. And this is what no one at the Pentagon wants to hear, is that armor itself doesn't have the same role on the battlefield, at least not in its current configuration, which is big gun, lots of armor, tank roll heavy. It's a problem because Anti-tank weapons can penetrate the armor with relative ease, and those anti-tank weapons, particularly drones, can assault those tanks with very quickly. And the tanks, because they are big targets and they don't move that fast, right? Relative to like an aircraft, right? Like relative to a drone, they are sitting ducks in a lot of ways for these kind of drones. In fact, they were sitting ducks for a Javelin, which I want you can rethink. Think about drones as just a very advanced type of missile, right? So the Javelin, which is a very basic guided missile, a very basic anti-tank guided missile, can easily take out a battle tank, a main battle tank, basically regardless of its level of armor. And then you have advances that have been made in anti-tank weapons, right? Again, someone figured out how to take the warhead, an RPG warhead, and slap it onto a drone. Now, as soon as that tank is firing and the infantry it's firing at call back to their FPV drone operators, within 60 seconds, a drone is airborne chasing that tank. How far can your tank go from the point where it fired, right, to get it? Can it outrun a drone? Can it hide from a drone? The answer is no. So the tank can either sit in place and get its location dialed in, or it can withdraw. But even the process of withdrawing itself is risky because it's got to expose itself as it crosses one of a very limited number of paths on the battlefield. So if you're an even okay FPV drone operator, you're going to sit there and go, oh, they said the tank fired in this tree line. We know, so I'm going to look in the tree line. You say, oh, it's not there. It's not where the infantry said it was. Okay, there's 3 routes it could have taken to withdraw, and I'm going to just check all 3 of them. And given that it's a tank, it's probably going to be in one of them, sitting out, lumbering down the road. We've watched this happen. And remember, Javelin teams, where it was human beings that took that risk, firing $50,000 Javelins to take out a $2 million tank. Now it's being taken out by a $500 FPV drone. The math simply does not favor consolidation. This is the true of every single system. The Ukrainian conflict has been a war in which super systems have been exposed as weak points. What do I mean by that? Well, in an era of a strung out front line, what you don't need, elite troops are not that useful, relatively speaking. Instead, you need basically trained conscripts that can and you need a lot of them, right? Similarly, you don't need 10 ultra super effective tanks. What you need are dozens and dozens of artillery pieces, because when you have a risk of loss, when there is no weapon system that is unstoppable, then the only way to maintain your combat power is to just take those losses and put more systems into the fight. And so if a system takes longer to make than it is to destroy, then that is a losing system that's not going to sustain itself on the battlefield. So again, this is why you see so much Soviet stuff getting refitted. The Soviet military system was meant for attritional warfare. It was meant to be easily repaired. It was meant to be blown up, destroyed. It was meant to have short lives on the battlefield, right? And this is the thinking of the Soviet military. And that's why now that they're in a Soviet-style attritional fight, that tanks like the Abrams, right, a single super tank, a super weapon, just aren't relevant on the battlefield anymore. That's why you don't hear about elite super troops in World War I, because there weren't any, because they simply weren't worth creating. They weren't worth training a dozen elite troopers that could get killed in one assault, in one artillery strike, right? Instead, you had broad thousands and thousands of people trained to the same basic standard, and then you let experience turn whole units into slightly more effective than other units. But even then, in an attrition warfare setting, you've always got to be able to slot these modular things into place. You're an infantry battalion, you lost your FPV team. Great, here's 3 dudes. We just got them out of training. Pop them right in, and they can instantly go to work in that battalion. So whether they're good or bad, there's just always this churn of people that don't even let experience be accrued. It's just the Pentagon cannot cope with the idea of a highly attritional fight. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, guys, Martin, Eugene, Crest, Chris Courses, Francis Cara, Sal 90, Petra. Hit that subscribe button. That really does make a difference for me. And I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.